it's so complicated living in relationships with people. And,
Absolutely.
we're not meant to be alone, but sometimes it would be easier. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bible Geeks podcast. This is episode 208. I'm Brian Sheely.
I'm Ryan Joy.
And thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. We are in session 6 of our 2x2 guided study. We've been talking a little bit on the last couple of conversations about creating a circle of safety, really making sure that we are fostering closeness, vulnerability, openness in our relationships with each other. And today, we're going to carry on that conversation talking about safe spaces. Friendship is really all about having a place where you can let your hair down, so to speak, and you can just be yourself and be open, and you don't have to be guarded. And I think that's one of the great marks of a good friendship.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know that you can rely on them, that they have your back, that they are thinking well of you, and that you can, like you say, you can open up to them. You can ask them for help and not feel like, you're burdening them beyond, the limits of the relationship. So, I mean, it's just so important to have those kind of people because none of us can make it on our own.
Absolutely. And speaking of other people who couldn't make it on our own, we're going to talk about a few old friends in our conversation starter that we're going to get into here. And that one we called Blanches and Roses. This is 2x2.
Blanches and Roses.
Few songs get stuck in my head like the theme from NBC's hit sitcom The Golden Girls. Humming that familiar tune, it's easy to pause and remember those Blanches and Roses in my own life. They're the ones I can confidently say, "Thank you for being a friend. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true. You're a pal and a confidant." Like those fictional friends, we may have real differences and sometimes even get on each other's nerves. But true and trustworthy friendships, ones built on trust and openness, never get old.
So here's the big idea. A true friend is someone you can count on. Of course, no conversation about trustworthy friends would be complete without thinking of our greatest friend, Jesus. He highlighted his extreme love for us when he said, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends." But Jesus wasn't just trying to toot his horn. He went on to say, "These things I command you, so that you will love one another." John 15, verse 17. The point? Jesus wants us to model our love for people after his unfailing and steadfast love for us.
The Proverbs often speak about the importance of being count-onable, people of our word, if we want meaningful relationships. Unless we're guided by integrity, our relationships are doomed to fall apart. If we're not trustworthy when there's something to be kept in confidence, who's going to want to open up to us? Relationships can't thrive if we're talebearers, gossips, liars, or deceivers.
It's a high standard, and sadly, even the closest friends go through tough times. But as Jesus was able to reconcile with Peter after his betrayal, love leads us to work things out and move on through grace and mercy. So maybe it's time to write a card or tell someone, "Thank you for being a friend."
So here's the big question. Can your circle of friends rely on you? So follow along with this guided study at BibleGeeks.fm/2x2, and may the Lord bless you and keep you today.
Shalom. Okay, your hook cracked me up there. We're really targeting the octogenarian female audience with this show. But
man.
Our big idea there was a true friend is someone you can count on. And it makes me think of the people that I've been friends with already for decades, and I hope to be someday like senile old man friends with. Like I'm seeing you and me, this is the Bible Geeks. What do you want? A bunch of grumpy old guys.
Apparently we're going to be the balcony guys from the Muppets.
Yeah, right. Oh, that would be fun. So, I'm looking forward to that. And surprisingly, those steady, reliable friendships that just are for the long haul often take less maintenance than the newer, more surface relationships. And yet they're the ones that you turn to for help and for advice and everything. It's like you're not worried, I didn't, I better do something to make sure they know I care. I haven't talked to them in a week. And, it's not like that. It's, these are solid.
Yeah.
And yet they're the ones that because they're so solid, they're the ones, you turn to. You go so quickly with those friendships from small talk to real talk at any point that it's needed. And I'm not saying neglect those friendships, but it just doesn't take much because you have such stability and such mutual understanding and commitment. And, it's amazing how many of those we can have in the Lord. I mean, there's this overlap that we haven't talked a lot about, but between, family, brotherhood, fellowship, and friendship. And as you move from one into this kind of smaller thing of close friendship with those in Christ, I mean, it's just a tremendous thing. So good picture to start with, comparing us to senior citizens in a retirement home. What about the big question?
So the big question we asked there was, can your circle of friends rely on you? And you used a word there just a minute ago. You talked about stability and being steady, being reliable, being count-onable, as we talked about in that conversation starter, is such a huge thing, right? Because you need to know that your friends are there for you. And can people rely on you? Can they count on you when, things are needed, when your time is needed? And that's just such a challenging thing because for all of us, that's going to look different for every relationship that we have, right? Being reliable, being count-onable might look very different between you and me, for example, or between me and some of my friends who I'm really close to here. Our relationship might look very different from all the ones around. But in all of them, I think there's this thread of being reliable and count-onable. And can somebody really count on the fact that, hey, I'm going to be there for them if they need me for whatever reason? So that actually kind of leads to our icebreaker because there's something that we often ask each other that I think feeds into this lighthearted question.
Absolutely. A way for your friends to rely on you. Brian, would you rather help a friend move or pick them up at the airport at midnight?
Obviously, helping somebody move is the harder one. Getting up and just driving to the airport is not as big of a deal. But man, I do really like the Tetris game of loading a moving truck. I love the challenge. I love getting to rifle through people's stuff. I feel like just aside from all that spatial configuration, all that itch that it scratches for me, I really do like just kind of spending the day and getting to know people and getting to talk to people as you rifle through their stuff and organize it into a truck. So that's probably the one that I'm going to pick if I had to. What about you?
I do agree with you there. I mean, I've had some really fun moving days. I remember one moving day out there in Phoenix with some friends. It was on NFL draft day. And I remember like me and Austin and just a bunch of different friends just, tuning in as we go from the first house to the second house. You check in the radio and then, there's a lot of fun to be had on moving days. But I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go with the airport at midnight, which involves some of my favorite things like late night driving and probably a little bit of conversation with a friend, how's your trip? And then talking on the way home. And like you said, it is also the easier choice.
Yeah, and I think even in both of those situations, that's not a huge commitment. But on the other hand, I feel like it's difficult for me to ask that of people. If somebody asks it of me, game on, right? That's awesome. I'm going to totally help out. But there's something weird deep within my soul about asking people, to commit their time and energy for things like that. So, I'll Uber or like hire a moving company before. Maybe I'll ask a friend. But I do really like that question. I think it's helpful to loop people in on your life that way.
I think there's something to what you're talking about. Maybe we get into that in the reach out question, because I think it's harder to ask than it is to do. It's easy to do that for someone, but you don't want to be, especially the pick you up for some reason. You can't move alone, but you feel like you can find a way to, I guess you could hire a moving company, but you can find a way to get home. And anyway, I think there's something to that, but let's move on from that into our next segment.
Which is Jesus Said. Jesus said some really cool things, and in John 15, verses 12 to 16, Jesus has a very clear connection between his love for us and the love he expects for us to have towards others. And we talked about that in that conversation starter a little bit, but he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." And then he lays the gauntlet down. He says, greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. And you know what he's talking about there. He doesn't even have to say it. Like, you understand he's laying down his life for his friends, and he loves us so much. But then he goes on to say, you're my friends if you do what I command you. So he's expecting his followers to listen and obey him if we're to have this close and loving relationship. And then he wipes away the old expectations of a servant and master relationship. And he says, I have called you friends. For all that I've heard from my Father, I've made known to you. And then he goes on to talk about how we are going to be given all the things that God wants to give us if we simply ask. And then he says at the very end of this in verse 17, these things I command you so that you will love one another. There's a lot here to be said about stability and friendship and love. So what do you find here from Jesus' words about friendship?
Yeah, it's one of the quintessential verses where Jesus says something about doing exactly what he does. And so his demonstration of love and friendship in the middle of the passage is bookended by this instruction for us to love each other, at the beginning and the end. But I think it also gives this helpful reflection on the meaning of friendship through this lens of Jesus and his disciples, which I think ultimately includes us. There's maybe some things that are specific to that relationship, but this is about Jesus and his people. And I don't think I had really thought about that before this series and a lesson I did earlier this year about how Jesus really gives us some clarity, elevating friendship and defining friendship for Christians, kind of like he does define what love means for us in a passage like this. And so what do we get from it about friendship? Well, friends stand together with a mutuality, mutual love and trust. When Jesus elevates his disciples from simple servants to friends, he isn't declaring them equal, but he does call them to a commonality with him. He wants us to do like he does in verse 12, and he expects friends to be trustworthy and faithful in everything that he asks them to do. So he says, you're my friends if you keep my commandments, and you can make your thoughts known to friends. And so he has shared what God has done. He hasn't kept them in the dark, and so they're not servants anymore, not just servants anyways. Of course, we're his servants, but also they are friends. And you sacrifice for friends. So he foreshadows his death for his friends. And man, that's all in 4 verses. There's a lot packaged up here in friendship. I'm surprised we've kind of alluded to this, but we haven't dove into it for 6 lessons here. So it's a pretty important moment for us to get what Jesus considers friendship and how he shows up for friends and wants us to show up for others.
I think that's what I was taking from this too. How he shows up and expects us to do the same, like that demonstration on his part. Okay, I'm going to model for you all what real friendship and love is like. And then you need to follow my example. And that's what I take from this so much is like you see his statements about friendship are really pointing to himself and saying, look at me, look what I'm doing for you, so that you can then turn around and do that for other people. And I love that he's holding nothing back from his disciples here, right? He's putting it all out there. He's saying, I'm giving you everything I can. And he's also saying, look, I'm not keeping anything a secret from you. Jesus is telling us everything that the Father has told him when he says, all I've heard from my Father, I have made known to you. There's a transparency to Jesus that shows up in how much he's opening up to us. And I think of safe spaces and I think of relationships built on this trust. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's showing up in this relationship, laying it all out on the table, making sure everybody's aware of what's going on. And he's not like holding a piece of himself back. He's giving everything and he's opening up about everything. And I don't know, that's what love is, right? Like when you think about a marriage, and I don't know, we go back and forth talking about marriage and these conversations about friendships, but I think it's really apt. If you think about a marriage, how long is that really going to last if you're holding back a part of yourself or you're keeping a part of yourself away from that relationship? I think what we see here in John 15 is that Jesus isn't holding anything back from us. And is my openness, is my willingness to communicate like Jesus did a feature of my friendships, like it was a feature of Jesus' loving relationships that he had with his disciples? And it's just a helpful reminder for me. not only in my marriage, but most especially, I think, even in all these other relationships, like with my close friends.
Yeah, that's a really interesting theme that you're hitting on there, and I'd never put it together quite like that. Jesus isn't revealing everything to everyone. There's that secrecy theme in the book of Mark where, he's just sort of waiting until it's time, and he's piecing little pieces out there, and he's so easily misunderstood in all of the Gospels, and so he's not guarded to protect himself, but he's strategic in what he's doing. But then you get to a passage like this at the end of his life, and he's sharing so much with the disciples and says, look, I've laid it out here on the line. You're not just servants who, I'll tell you what you need to know. If I think you need to know something, I'll let you know. Go away. I've got bigger things to think about. No, he has poured it out. He has said, here it is all on the table, what I'm trying to do, who you are, who I am, and, maybe more than they could really even handle, but he has been, like you say, transparent so far as they could, have it communicated to them. And Jesus associates that transparency with friendship. This is why I call you friends now. That is a level of vulnerability, a level of honesty and intimacy and openness that really changes a dynamic.
Yeah, if you think about Jesus creating anything with those disciples, a safe space for them to be and to learn and to grow like they were doing is definitely what he was doing for them. Mm-hmm. So let's move on here to our second segment on the episode, and that is Top 4 Proverbs.
1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so our first proverb number 1 here is actually 2 proverbs. In fact, I'm going to do 2 pairs of proverbs that are meant to go together, I think. And so it's Proverbs 20, verses 5 to 6. And these are 4 proverbs on trustworthy friends. And this first one says, the purpose in a man's heart is like deep water, but a man of understanding will draw it out. Many a man proclaims his own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find? And there's a song that I like. We quoted the theme song from Golden Girls, but there's maybe the greatest song on friendship ever. But there's another song about friendship that I really like by Ron Sexsmith, a singer-songwriter, and he calls it Imaginary Friends. And he says, imaginary friends, they will always let you down. And when all the good times end, you won't be seeing them around, for they run where the action is, and then they'll cross you off their list. Do you comprehend now? To imaginary friends, you don't exist. And then he says, second verse is, they'll ask you where you've been, but never wait for your reply. They'll meet you when your ship comes in, but never meet you eye to eye. As all the friends who've been real and true wonder who you're talking to, one thing you can depend on, imaginary friends, they can't see you. And that kind of summarizes, in some ways, both of the proverbs.
Yeah.
All of the proverbs I'm going to talk about, probably the ones you're going to talk about. But this set of 2 proverbs both contrast the majority of people with that rare, wise, loyal person that, when you find one of these people, you treasure them in your lives. And there are those people who keep their cards so close to their vest. You know those people. You just never know what they're after. And so, the proverb writer here says many people's aims are like deep waters. And deep water, that's...
No, thank you, sir. I do not like deep water.
Deep water, they're hidden from you. They're maybe even hidden from themselves. And deep water is mysterious and dangerous. It's a bit unsettling. Brian doesn't want to go in the deep water. Thinking of people in Israel, they don't want to go out where the dangerous seas are. Every time you see somebody out in the sea, they're getting thrown about, swallowed by a big fish, all kinds of things happening. And so, he's saying, you don't know what's going on with a lot of people, and their hearts and their purposes are so deep. But at the same time, a man of understanding will draw it out. And a lot of people proclaim their own steadfast love, but a faithful man who can find. So again, there's this one person that's not like most people. And, a lot of people will say how steady they are. They think of themselves as really devoted to their friends, devoted to other people, steadfast in their love. But a lot of us have found people to be talk and not a true friend. And real friends versus imaginary friends, you always find out eventually. And so, I think that's a really interesting, thought-provoking pair of proverbs about this idea of friendship and reliability and what are people really after? And can you count on and trust what they're saying they are? Well, you find out.
I think when we talked about the big idea from that conversation starter, a true friend is someone you can count on. That's exactly what this proverb is talking about. The fact that you've got this real, true friend. And when we were putting this together, we're very careful about the wording there because, it's not like your best friend or just your, acquaintance or whatever. Like it's a true friend. It's a friend who they're real. They're going to show up for you. Very different, like you said, from this imaginary friend that I think we probably have all met from time to time. So my second proverb is Proverbs 11, verses 1 and 3. I'm also going to do two kind of pairs, but they're separated by a verse. So Proverbs 11, verses 1 and 3, it says, "A false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them." And it made me think here when I was reading this, a false balance is an abomination to the Lord. You ever go to the doctor and they're like, okay, stand on the scale, we need to get your weight. And I'm like, every single time that happens, I'm like, wait a second, should I like strip down to my underwear? Like, this is not going to be a correct weight, right? If you're weighing my clothes and my shoes and my phone in my pocket and everything like that, like it kind of bothers me that like, this isn't accurate. Like this isn't actually how much I weigh. It isn't reality. And I hate the idea of going into the doctor and getting a false reading. And this idea of justice and honesty, when we're building relationships, this is way more serious than going to the doctor and standing on the scale. It is making sure that what we say is what we do, is what we believe all the way down to our core. We're genuine. We are people of integrity. We're people of our word. We are judging things accurately and rightly. We have proper motivations behind when we judge this situation or that situation. And, I just think about the idea of being honest, being true, being somebody who is consistently fair and reasonable. That is going to build trust, and it's going to build a certain amount of safety for everyone involved in a relationship. And if I'm not that way, then I'm going to live in this crooked, false, skewed idea of what reality really is. And I don't think anyone feels comfortable around people who are just not viewing the situation with honesty and integrity.
Yeah, that's such a great verse. And those two words, integrity and crookedness, those are heavy words in the Hebrew, right? Those are the idea of wholeness and completeness in the integrity and purity, as opposed to this idea of twisting and perverting in that idea of crookedness. I mean, there's so much to understand about righteousness and sin and about trustworthiness and deceit and all of those aspects. So that's a really powerful picture. My next pair of Proverbs, number 3, comes from chapter 27 of Proverbs, verses 9 and 10. And it says, "Oil and perfume make the heart glad, and the sweetness of a friend comes from his earnest counsel. Do not forsake your friend or your father's friend, and do not go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor who is near than a brother who is far away." So obviously there's a lot there, and oil and incense don't mean as much to me as they probably did to those who originally heard this proverb. But, there are smells that make me happy, make me feel at home and cared for, like those smells. And that's really the idea. The ones for me usually involve food, but we'll move on from that. And so Bruce Waltke, there's a Hebrew scholar I like, and his Nikot commentaries on Proverbs I think are excellent. And he explains the phrase earnest counsel as the sweetness of a friend who gives passionate, not disinterested counsel. And sometimes you get what feels like throwaway advice from people. Not that it's bad, but you don't have the sense that the person is invested, like they're disinterested. They're not passionate. They don't care that much. But a good friend thinks with you about your problems, like they're in it with you. They'll stand with you. They're giving you counsel that is coming from not only their heart, but from them plugging into your life. And really, it matters. And that's earnest counsel that comes from a friend. And it's like oil and incense. It makes your heart glad, and there's a sweetness to it, as the way the Proverbs say it. And then sometimes, on the other hand, we need help, not just good counsel. And that's the second part of this pair, that when trouble comes, choose a reliable friend or a friend of the family who has been proven over 2 generations instead of a relative. This makes me think, of course, Proverbs 18:24, the friend who sticks closer than a brother.
Yep.
This is a friend who you can count on more than you can count on your siblings and your relatives. And I think maybe these words near and far away imply closeness and maybe more than just geography. Otherwise, I don't think it's actually true that, always your next door neighbor is always closer and more reliable than a family member that lives far away. But there's a sense of a metaphorical nearness as well. Family matters, but not everyone you're related to cares or has integrity that you can count on. But the friends you can go to when the stakes get ratcheted up and when there's not a lot of room sometimes in some moments of your life for someone to flake out on you and it to all be okay. Like if somebody flakes out on picking you up at midnight, which I did have happen to me once and it was fine. It wasn't a big deal. Eventually I, got a hold of somebody and they picked me up. But if, the stakes are really high and you really need somebody to show up for you, you want to make sure you have somebody that is a real friend you can count on.
The opposite of these kinds of people leads into my 4th proverb here, Proverbs 26, verses 20 and 22. I've sort of, I guess, picked off the negative sides of these things, but, I think this is really helpful when he says, "For lack of wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no whisperer, quarreling ceases. The words of a whisperer are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body." And I don't think there is anything worse in a friendship than having gossiping and whispering and all of these kinds of things. That's what this proverb is really highlighting here. The fact is, gossiping and talking about people behind their back is only going to lead to fires. It's only going to stoke kindling this difficulty between people if somebody in this relationship is a talebearer. And so when we're talking about integrity and trustworthiness and honesty and all of these things, the opposite of that for me is somebody they're not somebody I can confide in. They're not somebody who I trust to hold something between just us. They're the kind of person who's going to go off and they're going to, dangle juicy morsels in front of other people and gossip about things. And I don't know, I just have such a hard time with this personally. And for me, one of the biggest tells whether or not I'm going to actually open up and share with somebody is if somebody has come up to me and told me something about someone else. That's the kind of person I am never going to open up to. I know that this person likes to gossip, and if they're doing it about other people, they are most definitely going to be doing it about me at some point if I open up to them. So it's just one of these things that is kind of a warning sign or kind of a something we need to avoid in our close relationships. Be count onable. Be people of integrity and honesty and trustworthiness when people share things with us and open up, because we're creating a safe space where people can confess their trespasses and they can tell us what's going on in a genuine and honest way. That's never going to happen if we're the kind of people who talk about these things with other people out of confidence.
Absolutely. That's not safety. That's guess what I heard. I'm in the know. That's it comes from a kind of desperation, maybe to be relevant or something that is not prioritizing a friend first and foremost. So that's a great one to round us out there.
So those are 4 proverbs on integrity and trustworthiness. Let us move on to our last segment here on the episode, and that is our reach out question. Reach out and touch someone. So Ryan, what do you learn from a time when someone had your back? Is there probably a time in your life where someone was in your corner. What do you learn from that?
Oh man, so many times over and over again, more than I would have any right to expect, and it has made a tremendous impact on me. I think as I think about a lesson learned from those times, it brings me back to what you were saying about asking for a ride from the airport, that you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
I grew up not wanting to rely on others too much, not to ask for anything, not wanting to put someone in a position to have my back, like we don't do that. We serve people. We're not served. That's not who we are. And so I think my biggest lesson has been confidence and comfort in getting help and learning that part of fellowship and friendship is the gift of supporting each other and letting others support me and believing in each other and having others have confidence in me and helping each other in times of need and receiving help. And so we've talked about that idea of it's more blessed to give than to receive, but don't hoard that gift of giving either. But there's this sense of security. I mean, we're talking about safe spaces. And there's a sense of confidence and security that starts to develop whenever you realize that lots of people have your back and lots of people love you. And I mean, it's more like the action comes from, this is a doing question like we always talk about, but the action comes from their heart and from the being of, they really care about me.
Yeah.
They really see me as somebody worth looking out for, worth standing with. And that is the true gift. And then, getting some help when you need it is like almost a bonus. So yeah, that's my big lesson, I guess, is it's good. It's okay to get help, and you can be confident and comfortable that it doesn't strain your relationship beyond the boundaries. It's safe to get that help.
I feel like I'm just, listening to younger Ryan at the feet of Glenn and Nancy, listening to, all of that, because that's exactly how your dad was. I mean, for sure. And I know your mom's that way too. And it's all well-intentioned for sure. And I can totally connect with it on so many levels, but it's like, we are not the ones who, allow people to help us. We help other people. And when you view your role so much as the servant of other people being served, it's a lot like Peter, right? It's a lot like, Peter looking to Jesus and saying, no, you don't wash my feet. That's not how this relationship goes, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you gotta see that there's a time for you to experience that blessing that other people will give to you if you allow them that time to do it. And I don't know, I struggle with that too. Even myself, it's like, yeah, you gotta just open up and let people feel comfortable stepping in and helping you. And that's not weakness on your part, but the struggle is real, man.
It is real.
Oh, speaking of other struggles. Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, what do you learn from a time when someone had your back? I feel like I am the kind of person who struggles sometimes to find an advocate. Like, I'm looking for people who are going to be in my corner, who are going to understand what's going on. And, a lot of times with some of the work that I do, with some of the projects that I take on, few people really kind of grok at like an entirety of what I actually do or how much time things take. Or, for me, a lot of times people will look at me and they're like, oh yeah, that won't take him very long. It's just an easy part of the process. He's just going to go off and do that and it'll be done and it'll be great and it'll be perfect and whatever. And it's like, there's some times where it's like things take a long time, a lot of tedious effort, a lot of late nights. And not often people see that. And for me, sometimes I feel like there are few people who are going to stand up in my corner and stand up and advocate for me. And there have been a few times where I've had people who really understand like what's going on, and they've stood up and they've said, no, you guys don't understand. This took a really long time. And, those are the kinds of people who I just want to be like, hey, is it okay if I hug you right now? Because you really appreciate when somebody sees you. And I think that's like a common thread through this conversation, right? When somebody really sees you, they acknowledge you, they understand what's going on. It's almost like Barnabas in a way. They totally are encouraging to you. They've got your back. They're standing up for you. And I think the big lesson I've taken away from people like that is just how much it's important for me to do that for other people, to step in for others. Like, when can I use an opportunity to speak up for a friend, to step in and to advocate for my friends? It's so easy to throw people under the bus, or it's easy to like go along with the crowd. And it's super easy just to stay quiet in situations and let people come to their own conclusions. But the risky and the loving approach is to suck it up and to stick your neck out for a friend. That is the challenging thing. And for me, that's the big gauntlet throwdown in this part of the reach out, is like, okay, can I really step up and do that more for people? Can I be somebody's advocate? Can I be in their corner, be their cheerleader, be their champion, whatever I need to be for them, just to see people and to understand what they're going through? It takes a lot of putting myself out of the equation and prioritizing other people's needs. But man, I think that's what we saw from Jesus back there in John 15 for sure.
I like that. That's a really good, practical. I mean, it's not like an easy, 1, 2, 3, just do this, but it's a very practical thing that we can do to just take a second look at people and just, look to the next level of, but what's really going on with them? And you don't even have to ask a lot of times. It's just being tuned in. It's like what we were talking about, the earnest counsel and the person who has, you don't know what they want and they're saying they're your friend, really being invested and trying to plug into how much work was that really for Brian to do that? Or what is really going on? I know you said you've got it covered and you're okay for this week, but I bet there's something that I could do or stand with you in some way or, help you to be encouraged and understood in some way. So I really like that.
This feels like a conversation that went really meta about our relationship, and it was definitely not. I just, it's
no, not at all.
It's so complicated living in relationships with people, and
absolutely,
we're not meant to be alone, but sometimes it would be easier. So let's move on to our next conversation here. Our challenge for the week.
I am ready to face any challenges that might be foolish enough to face me.
So listen, this is a simple one, and it is based on our conversation starter. Tell someone this week, thank you for being a friend. Maybe you can write them a card if they threw a party and invited everyone they knew.
Yeah, for those who know that song, it's going to be stuck in their head and they'll remember this challenge. I think this is just something that is nice to hear and it's nice to say. Just thank you is always meaningful, but it's particularly meaningful when it's about something so true. There's some things that you start to say something simple, but it's so real that you don't even realize until it gets caught in your throat as you're saying it, thank you for being a friend, and all of a sudden it's, oh, that got weird. I was just going to say something,
That got
I was
weird.
just saying thanks, man, but I really mean it. And so, and that comes through. People know, that it's real when you say something like, thank you for always being there for me. That's something that is big and it's summarized in, 6 words. So I think it's a great challenge.
I do too. Take it on. Do it along with us this week. And that rounds out our conversation here. And as we wrap this up, let's close with a closing prayer. In the study guide on our website, we have suggested a closing prayer. And that is, Holy Father, please bless us with strong bonds in our relationships with others, stemming from our love for you and your son, Jesus. And that's all based on John 15, verses 1 to 17 that we talked about earlier. So let's go to God in prayer. Our holy God, what amazing blessings that you pour into our lives when we look around at all the close relationships we have around us. These men and women that we can lean on to strengthen, comfort, correct, and support us. We thank you so much for giving us such deep and meaningful friendships. Hold us up to be the kinds of honest and trustworthy people of integrity we should be for them as they stand up and be those kinds of people for us. Please bless us with stronger bonds in these relationships as we learn to love you and your son, Jesus, more and more. Help us to move past times of struggle and disappointment when we don't follow through with our intentions to be faithful friends. Show us how to extend grace and mercy like you've extended to us. And when we see an opportunity to step in and to advocate for our friends this week, help us to have the courage and love enough for them to act. Please be with us, Lord, and we thank you for Jesus' love that leads us always back to you. These prayers and blessings we ask in his name. Amen.
Amen. Well, next week we'll continue this 2x2 conversation with session 7, talking about how we can sharpen and shape each other. And, this is obviously going back to that famous iron sharpening iron proverb. But, that's one of the great things about friendship is being able to help, support, and challenge each other.
Yeah, with the sharpening and shaping and the poking people in the eye. And it's going to be great after this conversation about creating a safe space.
So to prepare for that conversation, we encourage you to read along with us Mark chapter 10, verses 17 to 22, Proverbs 27, verse 17, and Hebrews 10, verse 24.
Yeah, there's so much we could get into in that conversation about what friends are able to do for each other. It's not just creating a warm, fuzzy, cushy environment in which we can all feel safe and sing Kumbaya around the fire. No, sometimes we got to get into the deep and challenging conversations, and that will be what we do on our next episode. So thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in to the Bible Geeks podcast. You can find us on our website at BibleGeeks.fm. You can find show notes for this episode in your podcast player of choice or BibleGeeks.fm/208. As always, you can follow along with this guided study over at BibleGeeks.fm/2x2. And until next episode, everyone, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
Shalom.